Yo, what is up, everybody? Sarasco back again with the final chapter from our zombie story titled 50 Days After the Apocalypse, written by Ruber Rollington. Remember to check out the links in the description below. Show love to the author, like, comment, and subscribe. Chapter 8. A week slipped by, and despite the constant threat of death, Amy had to admit it did feel safer than wandering the streets. The group was being held on the 25th floor of an old office block. Every access point had been barricaded by the father and son, though it wasn't as secure as any of the barricades that John used to build. Every morning, Dad would rouse the captives and untie Sarah, who would set about making breakfast. Helen would then set out a few minutes later after very wary Dan untied her. After that, Ian would eventually rise from his drunken stupor and take a large portion of whatever Sarah had made for breakfast, leaving the others to split what remained between themselves. Then, it was the worst part of the day. Ian would take John into the next room and supposedly interrogate him. Really though, it was just the man wanting to hurt somebody. Amy would try her best to ignore what was happening and would play with James and Jane. Eventually, Ian would get bored and throw John back into the room, set about his drinking. Amy would crawl over to her companion, who would be trying his best to lose consciousness. The two would sit together in a comfortable silence and wait out the remainder of the day. Finally, as the light receded, there would be a knock on one of the barricades that would signal Helen's return. Then, Sarah would cook the group dinner, where they all retreated to their own corners, to sleep, start the day all over again. In terms of the group, Helen was by far the most capable. Amy half believed that she might even be better at surviving in this world than John. However, it was clear that the twins were her weakness. James and Jane were two normal 5-year-olds, who, while it was nice to see two children uncorrupted by the world, Amy knew they were a liability. Sarah, on the other hand, was a beaten down girl. Despite Dan's best efforts, it was clear that torturing the girl was Ian's favorite thing to do. Ian was a typical abusive drunk with a seemingly limitless amount of alcohol. The odd one, though, was Dan. Amy wasn't quite sure what to think of him. At first, he was kind to the captives, especially Sarah. Other times, though, he would treat them as prisoners, barely saying a word. During that week, there was one thought that both kept Amy going and put her on edge. This uneasy peace could not last, and it would end only one side be left standing. John took a slow, deep breath as he attempted to recover from the last beating. He currently had a black eye and probably a broken nose. His body was the worst, though. While his shoulder had healed, his ribs were not able to recover due to Ian's daily interrogation. The sun had set, and Sarah was in the process of making dinner for everyone. Ian was in his usual seat, already drunk, while Dan was leaning on the doorframe, Amy's cricket bat next to him. Sarah was just finishing up the food when her arm gave out again. The bang of the pot on the portable cooker echoed throughout the office. Ian was up immediately, ranting at the poor girl as she tried her best to scoop up the lost food. Don't put it back in the pot. You pricks can have that waste. But it's not done yet, Sarah responded, continuing her efforts. Angered by her answering back, Ian picked up the girl and punched her hard in the gut. Sarah screamed as the punch hit her stab wound. Amy was on her feet in seconds, rushing to the girl's aid. Leave her alone. Ian dropped Sarah and rounded Amy instead. What, huh? You gonna make me, huh? Maybe I will. The slap echoed almost as much as the clang of the pot. Amy was knocked to the floor by the force of the blow. Ian started to laugh at the fallen girl, only to let out a grunt as John dived into the man, knocking the wind out of him and forcing Ian back into the opposite wall. John stood protectively in front of his companion, his breathing still labored and his hands still bound. Look at you, sticking up for your girlfriend. Obviously, I didn't hit you enough earlier, Ian said as he drew his gun. John stood his ground, smirking at the old man. What are you smiling at, huh? I just can't believe it took me a week to realize that the gun's fake. John's response only angered Ian more as he tossed the weapon aside and moved threateningly towards the defiant man. You think you're so clever, don't you? Well, the gun might be fake, but these ain't. And he raised his fist, made to punch John in the face. If the man had been sober, the blow might have connected, but drunk, as he always was, his swing was wilder than that, but infected. John swayed backwards out of the way, and the hook before headbutting Ian in response. The elder man fell back, blood spraying from his nose. Regaining some of his composure, Ian held out his hand towards his son. Give me the bat. Dan hesitated, clearly unsure what to do. Then, as he reached for the weapon, John spoke. For once in your life, think of yourself. Every eye in the room turned towards the bound man. Look, full immunity. We'll forget about all this and you can join us. Ian just burst out laughing, marching over to his son. You think my son would have the backbone to do something like that? He's a little brat, always has been. Dan shot an angry look at his father, but lowered his gaze when Ian stared back. You really want to stay like this? Knuckling under, barely better than a captive? Just give up, man. There's nothing you can do or say to get this little coward to do anything. I can't, but I bet she can. John countered, turning to Sarah, who was still on the floor, tears in eyes from the pain of the blow. Dan and Sarah looked at each other for a second before the girl spoke. "Please, help me." Before Dan could respond, Ian let out an angry growl as he marched towards the defenseless girl. What are you saying now, girl? You're nothing but trouble. Could have done this a long time ago." As he walked towards Sarah, Ian raised the bat threateningly. Suddenly, Dan was stood between his father and the girl, arms outstretched protectively. Ian scoffed at his son's actions, bat still raised aggressively. "Think carefully about this, boy. You really want me to show you what happens when you go against me?" Dan held his position for a moment longer before backing down, lowering his arms. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Suddenly, Dan grabbed the handle of the bat with one hand and with the other punched his father in the face. Ian fell backwards, letting go of the bat as he did. Several things happened as the room erupted into chaos. Ian charged at his son, who threw the bat to the ground, tackled his father to the ground. As the two of them rolled around, punching and kicking each other in an attempt to gain the advantage, John rushed to Amy's side, motioning to the knife. Catching on, Amy grabbed the weapon to cut her companion free. Sarah crawled backwards, trying to get out of the way of the brawling father and son. Ellen tried her best to shield the twins as they cowered behind her, fearful of what was happening. As Amy cut John loose, he grabbed the knife and freed her as well, before handing the weapon back. "Alright, look, cut them loose as well," John said, motioning to the siblings as he rushed off into the other room in search of something. As Amy went to free the other captives, she was almost knocked over by Dan as he was thrown backwards by his father. Dan recovered his footing and punched Ian in the gut as the man tried to capitalize on his advantage. Ian staggered in pain as Dan continued to punch his dad in the gut. In desperation, Ian grabbed his son's leg and attempted to knock him to the ground. But Dan countered, twisting in midair and landing on top of Ian. Before the man realized what was happening, Dan was on him, punching his face with a ferocious anger born from the years of abuse he had suffered. The boy lost track of time, focused only on the object of his anger. Suddenly, Dan found his arms being held back as John pulled the boy off of his father. Dan struggled to kick Ian's prone form as well as he was pulled off of the man. Casting about angrily, the boy saw all the former captives arrayed around him, Helen with the knife and Amy with her bat. Dan paled a bit as he realized what was on all of their minds, but John intervened before anyone could do anything. "Look, not now. There's no way the infected didn't hear that. If you want any chance for your brother and sister surviving today, we need to move quickly." That was enough for the woman as she lowered her knife, albeit begrudgingly. Dan gave a look of thanks to John, who just ignored him, started giving out orders. Alright, Amy, grab our packs. Helen, go with Sarah and collect anything of Ian's that might be useful. You guys, listen to me, and we just might get out of this. Ian moaned as he slowly regained consciousness. His vision was blurred, his head was pounding, and there was a sharp ringing in his ears. Finally awake, are you? The voice came from an out-of-the-focus person, sitting on a chair in the middle of the room. Where am I? You don't recognize this place? Even as the figure spoke, his vision came back into focus. He was lying on the floor of a different room, the one where he and Dan had fought. His head still pounding, Ian slowly sat up. His vision finally fully returned. He recognized the figure in front of him as John. The other man, who sat cross-legged on an old chair hockey stick lying beside him, and his left hand hidden behind his back. To think that Run had it in him, huh? I have to teach him a lesson later. I wouldn't do that if I were you. And why wouldn't you? Because it brings your death a lot closer, John said, also standing up, displaying the knife in his left hand. Ian suddenly became alert, his body immediately tensing, ready for another fight. The pair stared at each other, looking for an opening to pounce. Then, John slowly began to bend down, pick up his trusted weapon. Ian attacked. Launching himself at the younger man, Ian crossed the distance in a matter of seconds. But it was too slow. John quickly straightened up, stabbing the knife into Ian's right arm, just below the shoulder. Like a matador dodging a bull, John then quickly sidestepped the charging man, sticking his foot out at the last second to trip Ian and send him crashing to the floor. Ian slid along the dust-covered wood before finally coming to a halt when his back slammed into the opposite wall. The elder man let out a growl of rage as he quickly attempted to get back to his feet. What he wasn't expecting was to just as quick crash back to the floor as his right arm refused to support his weight. Ian stared at his arm, angrily not understanding why an arm, which he could still feel like any other limb, refused to even move an inch. I severed a tendon. John's words, though spoken quietly, still cut through the man's rage-filled madness. As Ian's gaze snapped to the speaker, he elaborated. Look, I'm sure you're too stupid to know this, but in each of your limbs, there's a set of tendons that are required for you to move the limbs. Essentially, I just disabled your right arm. Though he didn't understand most of what the young man had said, Ian had got the basic gist of it. So what if I can't use my right arm? I don't need it to kick your bloody ass. And with that, the man once again launched himself at John. With a sigh, John tossed the knife over to his right hand before stabbing his attacker, the same place on his other arm. Ian howled in pain as he struggled to stay upright on his charge, with his two arms now hanging uselessly at his side. John had other ideas. As the older man brought his charge under control, John lunged forwards and stabbed the back of Ian's left calf. The man went limp, collapsed to the floor with a thud. John then proceeded to walk forwards and turn Ian over onto his back. The older man's face was a mask of blood from its recent run-in with the floorboards. His nose was now crooked, rivers of blood poured out of the obvious broken feature. Ian tilted his head to the side, and with several coughs, spat out a mix of teeth, spittle, and blood. Suddenly, John was forced to dodge backwards as the man's right leg flew upwards, almost connecting with his face. With a satisfied sigh, John moved over to the barricaded door, leaving the older man to thrash around the floor. Ian gave up his useless kicking and stared up at the ceiling, desperately trying to move his arms. As he lay there in a quickly filling pool of his own blood, Ian knew with the certainty that comes with your final hour that this was where he was going to die, and it terrified him, far greater than any fear he had ever had before. Tears leapt unbidden to his eyes, blurring his vision, as in one last roll of dice, he began to plead. Please, please don't kill me. Gone was his confidence and assurance in himself. Now, he was just a coward, afraid of death. Over and over, he pleaded, getting louder with each cycle. I'm not going to kill you. Ian became deathly quiet as he heard John's words. A couple of blinks, he cleared his vision and looked over at the man. John was now standing by the window, hockey stick in hand, knife tucked through the belt, tucked into his trousers. Do you know why I chose this room? It's because through this window is a balcony that connects to the neighboring building. Do you know why I did this? Before the man could respond, there was a crunch as an infected smashed its hand through the door. Ian paled as he suddenly realized what was going to happen. John suddenly smashed the window with his hockey stick and began to yell at the top of his voice. Every infected within earshot suddenly began to make their way to the room. Ian's mind snapped as the man burst out laughing, further driving the infected into a frenzy. John slipped out of the window, onto the balcony, and towards the next building. As he walked away, Ian's laughs transformed into screams as the infected broke through and mauled him. As the man was literally ripped apart, a sickeningly sinister smile crept onto John's face. Amy tried her best to ignore Ian's pain screams as John crept in through the open window. Shutting the window behind himself, John at least managed to mute the sounds. The dark room was small, but it was secure especially with the barricades Amy and Helen had constructed. In the center of the room sat Dan, with the former captives stood around him, not quite at ease, even though the boy was bound. John flopped down on the floor, his tired body beginning to pack up. Everyone looked at the man, clearly waiting on his decision. John sighed, knowing they wouldn't like what he was about to say. The boy gets to live. The profanity that spewed from Helen's mouth would have made a sailor blush, as it was just made twins giggle. Amy shot a confused look at her companion, while Sarah seemed secretly pleased at his decision. John waited out Helen's rage before he asked the woman, "So, what are your plans?" To take James and Jane somewhere safe." "Nowhere safe." "Then I'll make somewhere safe." "Then why not do it with us?" For the second time, Helen was forced to pause, caught off guard. What are you suggesting?" "Well, everyone in this group is useful to you. For all to make it, then we need everyone here." Helen then shot a murderous look at Dan. "Why do we need him?" "We don't. You do. Think of him as James and Jane's bodyguard." I can do that just fine." "And what about the one time you can't? Because it will happen. Those two can't look after themselves, and you can't watch them all the time without getting yourself killed." Helen seemed torn, and the one hand, what John said made sense, but on the other, this was the boy partly responsible for everything that happened in her life the last few weeks. Finally, he relented and moved over to the twins, saying over their shoulder, "Look, tell you what, how about he doesn't get a weapon?" "Hey, look, Amy, the balcony connects to this building. Just to be on the safe side, could you board up the window?" "Sarah, I think we could all do the little food, don't you?" The two girls nodded and set about their task while John moved over to the final member of their group. Dan looked up at his savior, who crouched down in front of him. Pulling out the knife he had just used on Ian, John brandished the weapon for the boy to see. "Look, you make me regret this, and I promise you, you will wish for a weight as nice as your dad's." Dan gulped, nevertheless nodded his head to show he understood. With that, John severed the boy's ropes before heading over to his rucksack to begin unpacking. John sat, bathed into the moonlight, looking out of the street below as he began his watch duty. Behind him, the rest of the group was sleeping in makeshift mattresses made up of sleeping bags and spare clothes. Well, almost all the group. "Look, you can quit pretending now," John spoke quietly, so as not to wake the others. His gaze not shifted from staring out at the street below. Almost silently, Dan rose and crept over to the window, sitting opposite John. For a while, the two sat in silence as both waited for the others to speak. Finally, the boy relented. Wait, how did you know I was awake? You remind me of myself. I know I wouldn't want sleep while surrounded by a group of people I've been holding captive for weeks. Look, you should be more trusting. Are you telling me that's how you would react in my situation? The boy struggled to keep his temper under control, knowing that the last thing he needed right now was to wake the members of the group up. No, I wouldn't. There's a difference between you and me. Yeah, what's that? Unlike me, you're only acting tough and emotionless. I'm not saying to go back to the person you used to be. Just stop, being an outsider. It means you'll have to work to get on their good side. But Amy trusts you, as does the girl. What about you? Tell you what, you're useful to the group. As long as you remain so, I'll support you. A small smile of gratitude appeared on Dan's lips after John's response, but the man quickly added, Look, don't get me wrong, this works both ways. The moment you stop being useful to my survival is the moment I leave you to fend for yourself. An uncomfortable silence followed neither of the survivors, feeling the need to speak. Eventually, John spoke up again. Look, if I were you, I'd get some rest. You have a long and hard day tomorrow, and you still have a watch on your own later. Without responding, the boy quietly climbed to his feet and tiptoed away, only to stop a few steps later and turn. I don't believe you're as emotionless as you think you are. With that, Dad made a final few steps and sucked down into his sleeping bag. John smiled once again as he looked out of the window and whispered to himself, Tell me that in a few days. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of our story.